Europe has been at the forefront of the renewable energy push, but at the same time, there's still strong demand for oil and gas on the continent. So, what's the current state of the market? Will oil and gas play an important role? And how did the energy crisis change the way that Europe thinks about energy security? To answer those questions and more is ADX Energy Executive Chair Ian Tchacos. Ian, thanks for being here today.
Pleasure. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you too. So can you start by walking us through what's behind the ongoing appetite for oil and gas in Europe?
Yeah, look, it really hasn't changed. Over the last 20 years, there's been a big sort of push towards renewables. Still, I guess a lot of people don't realise in the world, 84% of our energy still comes from oil and gas and coal. Over the last 20 years in Europe, they've tried to increase the amount of renewables. They've moved the dial about maybe 4 to 6%. That's cost them about $5 trillion US dollars to do that. Meanwhile, the other 84% has cost about $8 trillion. So that gives you an idea of the difference in cost, but also the difference in time. So the reality is renewables, like in Australia, just are taking longer and they're a lot more expensive. And what we're also seeing politically is that a lot of people are pushing back.
And there's the possibility of seeing turbines off in the distance, which will be quite jarring.
It's scary because of the infrastructure involved. And as I said before, the magnitude and the size of the project.
This is costing us too much money. We can't continue this way.
So how did the energy crisis change the way that Europe thinks about energy security? Has it made local, reliable supply more important than ever?
Oh, look, I think so. Look, I mean, they still need oil. I mean, oil is imported almost 100%. From overseas. Europe probably produces about 30% of its own gas, but that's actually reducing fairly substantially. Oil, I mean, we think of oil as going into cars, but the majority of the oil now is used in petrochemicals. And gas is used for all sorts of things, from steel making, cement making, basically electricity generation. So the difference between Europe and I think what's going on in Australia is the Europeans have realised for some time that gas is it needs to be a transition fuel. It's clean, it's efficient, and we're going to need it for at least 30 to 40 years. But what's really changed is the fact, post-Russian invasion of Ukraine, basically Europe was getting drunk on Russian gas for the last 20 years. It's been cheap, it's been plentiful. And I think, like in most places, energy companies have done a really good job, and we've taken, energy for granted, and therefore energy security for granted. So what we're seeing now, the Europeans are realising that they need to have greater control of their energy. So they're able to replace it, but at great cost.
I think you've just touched on it a little bit there, but given Europe's shift away from Russian supply, how realistic is it for the region to meet its energy needs without oil and gas in the mix?
Well, look, it is meeting them, but at a cost, higher price. Also, about 15% of Europe's, if you like, industry has been diminished because of higher energy costs. So things like cement factories and things like that have had to be shut down because they just can't stay in business. Also, there was also a big push towards hydrogen, but simply hydrogen is directly to make hydrogen, it's directly related to the cost of electricity, and the cost of electricity has probably tripled. But what Europe has had to do, for a long time it's been importing its gas from Russia. That made about 30% of its gas imports. That's probably diminished now to about 10%. But still it's getting some Russian gas, which they're trying to stop altogether. The Russian gas has been replaced by LNG, which is expensive because you've got to produce the stuff, freeze it, put it in a ship, defrost it, and then put it into the grid. But then the other big contributor has been Norway. Norway, Azerbaijan, Algeria brings in piped gas. So as a result of that, I guess what you've had is less reliance on Russian gas, but more reliance on other imports.
And we've seen a lot of volatility in European gas prices. What's driving that now, and what could it mean going forward?
Yeah, look, I mean, the volatility is obviously very much a supply-demand situation. So quite simply, demand is outstripping supply, especially if they want to wean themselves completely off Russian gas. So therefore they're relying more on imported gas, and that's becoming more expensive. But also what you see, a lot of it's political as well. So every time, I think for a while there, we thought that the war between Russia and Ukraine would be resolved. You know, Trump said he'd do it in a day. It's been a few more days than that, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere. So I think also the realisation is that amongst Europeans is they've got to control their own destiny. So energy security is a lot more important. But the energy mix in Europe is very important, how much LNG you're utilising. Also, Europe tends to store quite a bit of gas. So in summer, when gas is cheaper, they'll store it. And then in winter, they can draw down on that gas because obviously their demand goes up. Everyone's trying to keep warm. So you will see price fluctuation seasonally. But what we're also seeing is politically that people are saying, well, okay, we need more gas, we need more coal, we need to bring nuclear back. And try to diversify their energy mix so they're less reliant on outside sources.
As Europe works towards net zero targets, do you think that oil and gas still have an underappreciated role in keeping energy stable and affordable?
Yeah, look, definitely. I think the other thing that Europeans are, realising, that they can't keep going with the NIMBY approach. They need to try and find ways of generate more of their own energy. But also they realise that their industry is actually being hurt by the fact that if they're having to pay more for their own domestic energy, then bringing in energy from outside also results in energy that's being produced in a less sustainable way. So I think what we're going to see actually is a greater demand for European energy that's produced locally, an ongoing demand for things like LNG, but also what we're going to see is that probably energy that's produced within Europe will actually be compensated for the fact that it's being produced at a much higher environmental standard, because otherwise they're hurting their own, if you like, energy industry.
Well, Ian, thanks for being here and for giving us your insights on the European gas market.
It's a pleasure. It's great to be here.